Hello, Eli here. Still working on that long-ass Dark Souls animatic. It got slowed down a bit due to the stream events I've been working on Twitch. I mentioned this when I put up the straw poll asking what you guys wanted me to do next, but I'll release this project first since it's easier to get out in less than a month. The only downside is that this will be less elaborate than it could have been. Part of the Twitch and Picarto stuff I've been doing for the past couple of months is that I also have Twitch alerts on. When you have a new follow, a subscription, someone hosts you or donates to you on Twitch, it puts a little message on the screen with an animated GIF of your choice. The animated pictures you've been seeing are the ones that I've made for those alerts. Now, as I always tell you guys, I'm not really an animator so much as it's something that I just kind of do. The poor Korean people in the sweatshops that have been making in-between frames since they were 7 years old are the real animators. They're just not real people. Anyway, I'm sure a lot of you guys are curious about animation, so I thought making a little repeating GIF would be a great way of showing off the basics of it, and to let you guys know how infuriating it can be. I got all three of the prior ones done in 1 month, but it still takes a few days just to get even one of these looking even moderately okay. Some of this will be recorded on Picarto, some of it may not be. Just a heads up for what's going on. Alright, let's go. Okay, Picarto. Here's what we're gonna do. First off, I want to explain what exactly it is for you Picarto guys, what we're going to be doing today. I'm going to be making another animated GIF, and first off, what we're going to do is I'm going to show you the ones that we've done before, which the people on YouTube would have already seen this, of course. But first we have Amoya here. I wanted to show her off mainly as a demonstration because she's the most complicated out of all of them. You'll notice that there's 8 frames of animation. And down here at the very bottom, as far as the assembly goes of the frames, they all move at 0.15 seconds, I think is how it works in Photoshop. 0.15 seconds, so that whenever you animate them together, they move at a certain speed. Thankfully, for anyone actually trying this at home, this is something you probably won't have to worry about for quite some time anyways. But I wanted to make that clear either way. Let's open up Shure for a second, show her off. As you can see, same exact thing, 0.15. Moves at the exact same speed. 8 layers. It moves through each one of these layers and then moves backwards through those layers. And as you can see from the base PSD that I'm using to make these in the first place, there are actually only 5 frames of animation. 5 core frames of animation anyways. What's happening is that it will go through each of these. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then once it gets to 5, it goes 4, 3, 2, and then it repeats back at number 1. And that's what makes it loop. So you need to actually make sure that you have 5 frames of animation at least. And, well, it depends on how many frames of animation you want in the first place. So the way I'm doing it is it's going to be 5 frames of animation. And I wanted to show off Amoya specifically because she does this tail swishing animation, as you can see. Just like that, swishing a little tail back and forth. It doesn't look as smooth as it could be because we're only working with 8 total frames. But in the case of her, if you're going to do something like that, then you'll notice I had to make a separate group that has all 8 frames of animation for her tail moving back and forth. Otherwise, if you only used 5, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then it went back to 4, then you would notice that it wouldn't swish back this way. It would just follow the same arc that it traveled on the way to that number 5 frame in the first place. So if you're going to do anything that complicated, then you will have to use the full range of whatever frames that you're trying to use for a loop. But I think for most people that's not going to come up either way. The only time it really should is if you're doing something like hair waving in the breeze or something complicated like that. But you get the idea. All of these are kind of composed the same exact way. Whether it's Shure, whether it's Imoya, or whether it is Sharika if I can find her. We'll open up her PSD real fast. It works the same exact way. Things shouldn't be open like this. Number 5. Good, okay. You notice that she's the same way. She only has 5 frames. And all these for the sake of making sure it's obvious. All these are 800, I believe. Yeah, 800 by 800. Anytime that you're doing an animation like this, the resolution doesn't have to be very big anyways. So don't worry about that too much. You can make it way smaller than that. Doesn't really matter. But the next one I'm going to make, what this video is going to be about, is I used to do a quest on TG-chan years ago for a character. There was Kitty and Burns were the two main characters. And a character that looked sort of similar to this was named Kitty, just because it was kind of a cute little joke. Her actual name was Cynthia, and then later on, whenever I did Gauge, the webcomic that no one read, of course, it had a character named Jael, who's basically this. This is basically her same exact design. So the context of the universe that I'm setting up for the thing next year, this character is now going to be known as Kieran. Which there's reasons for that. Don't worry about it. It's basically just Old English. Relates to escaping or fleeing from something, whatnot. Doesn't really matter. Okay. But I've done a few sketches of her, kind of rough ideas of what direction I wanted her design to go in. Just took a few minutes. I did them at the end of some prior streams. So the first thing that we're going to actually need to do is just come up with a pose. As far as what it is exactly that you want to do in the first place. You don't actually want it to be overly animated. Or else you can make it so animated that it's not really clear what it is that you're looking at. Or you can make it so little animated that it's not worth making an animated GIF in the first place. But as far as her basic pose goes, I think this kind of general idea is fine. Because her character she's kind of a brawler. Like, she likes punching things with her fists. She doesn't really necessarily like to fight. But, as far as her character goes, she approaches things from a very straightforward perspective. She has a... Part of making this is going to go hand in hand with the character design part of things. You do need to consider what it is that you're trying to communicate about that character. And I'll go a little bit over that later on, but for the time being, let's just concentrate on the actual thing that we're doing here. So kind of think about what it is that you're going to be doing. Like with the Amoya GIF, I knew that I really just wanted her tail swishing back and forth. That was the main thing that I wanted to focus on. And her kind of bobbing up and down just a little bit is, just there, just enough to kind of focus on the animation. With Shere, she was the first one I ever did. I just wanted to kind of make her having this pose where she's actually showing off the donation alert. And with Sharika, she was probably the most difficult because her thing was that it was blowing in the wind. And we'll talk more about what position everything should be at frame by frame later on in this project. But for the sake of her, I think what I'm going to do is, and this is 800 by 800, there's no sense in working in a larger resolution. For the sake of her, I think what I'm going to do is just kind of have this really... You don't have to be exact with this whenever you're first laying down primaries, of course. I think with her, I'm going to have her kind of looking directly at the viewer. And have it be something like she's clenching her fists or something like that. Not really sure exactly yet. But I will show you this process just enough to get the basic idea down. You don't have to worry about the costume or whatever they happen to be wearing too much. Just get the general idea of what their body shape is going to look like. Because their body shape is going to be what carries... Like, if you're making a blob monster, then just focus on the blobs. If it's wearing a coat and it's a blob monster, just draw the blob first, then worry about the coat later. I wanted to have kind of a spread out pose because she's a very... I don't want to say masculine character, but, she's rough and tumble, kind of, I guess, tomboyish, if you want to look at it that way. Very strong. She's, as far as the context of the story, she's kind of the right-hand aide to Aiton. Of course, most of you people have no idea who that is, so it's not going to matter to you one way or the other. She's not going to have a huge place in the thing that I'm going to be doing. But if the story continues on beyond that, she would. Let's try to keep her kind of basic outline. Like I said, you don't have to be too exact with it, just as long as you get a rough idea of where it is that you want everything to be. A lot of people, of course, struggle with the bottom half because usually you don't focus too much on it. And especially if you draw too much of the upper half of the body too soon, which I kind of accidentally did, then you can end up letting that control the basic posture a little bit too much. Whereas if you did something like, say, the stick figures almost, like this. You know, just really, really loose and ugly looking. Then you kind of get a general impression of where it is that you want the direction of their form to go. So you don't have to worry about it too much. And as you can see, that's working a lot better for me, because I'm not really committing to anything. Whereas if you, say, draw an overly detailed head or something right off the bat, and then try to draw everything around it, you're going to have a really hard time of it, because you're trying to Lego piece things together that don't necessarily need to fit together in the first place. The shape of the head's not even that exact, so I don't have to worry too much about the neck anyways. The general shape of the head would be kind of in that position, I guess. So if I'm going to do it like that, good old hand on the hips pose. I always love that hand on the hips pose. The reason why, Chad, I chose 5 frames of animation is because drawing even a single frame of animation takes a very, very long time. And for the course of it just being a simple repeating animated GIF, there's no reason to make it very long. If you make it only something like 4 frames of animation, then it would go, 1, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 1, which might be enough to get a full range of motion in, but probably not. But it is possible. If you're making like sprites, then you kind of follow the same general idea. You work with a primary like this, and once you have a general idea of what it is that you want down, then you will move on from there and just keep adding layer upon layer, which is what we're going to be doing in the future. But for the time being, just get that general sort of skeleton down as far as what you want it to be. And this, to me, is fine for a static pose, but it's not really good for something that's going to be animating back and forth. I decided not to go with a tail. She's not going to have a tail. She's going to be the most human-looking, probably, character that you guys have seen so far. Even though she's one of the Sonder. All the Sonder usually have these animalistic characteristics because they're being overtaken by the wild, but she's actually from another place, and she's been there for quite a while, so she's started to develop those characteristics, but she hasn't been there long enough to have to worry about it. So she's actually going to be pretty human-looking. So I think I want to do something with her arm, because there's various things. Usually the easiest thing to do if you're doing a repeating animation just like what I'm doing is you kind of keep the legs more or less exactly where they are. I mean, you can make them walk or something, but a walk cycle is insane. You do not want... If you immediately jump in the animation and you start trying to do a walk cycle right off the bat, you're just going to end up hurting yourself. Because that gets very complicated very quickly, because so many things are shifting as far as weight goes and as far as the momentum of limbs and so forth. Like, it gets super complicated. Which you can do, but, it's just something that you probably should avoid. So it's much easier to just have one thing to focus on. Like, Amoya, like I said, is the tail. Shere was her little hand, and she kind of bobs up and down a little bit. And with Sharika, it was her cape and her hair. And with her, I think I want it to be, let's see, her head kind of adjusting a little bit, like up and down. And I think her arm also. I'd like her to form like a bicep or something. Like, not like flex, but kind of curl. And it helps if you're ever having any problems with animating or coming up with a pose. And it helps if you like get up out of your chair and actually physically do that pose yourself, which is I was joking about in the stream the other day, but it actually does really help. A lot of people that do animations or just do simple, very simple, well, really just any kind of artwork. It helps if you have like a mirror nearby that you can actually look at and make the exact expression that you want, And don't try to draw your face, obviously. But it does help you get a rough idea of where, the expression needs to hold the most, where, your face needs to curl and so on. Same goes if you're like drawing hands or something. Hold out your hand, look at your hands, see exactly what it looks like, then draw that. Although if you have a big chunky masculine hand and you're drawing a pretty lady, then maybe you should find another hand, or just kind of, realize that it's going to be thinner than your big monkey hand, since you're a horrible monstrosity. Like me. Although I don't have hands that big. Alright. This is not really exactly what I want. I don't want it to be that exaggerated where she's just holding it out like that. I want it to look more natural. Usually, a lot of times, it helps to draw the hand first. Which may not make sense to you, but the hand actually controls a lot of where everything else is going to go. So just, if you have it in your mind's eye as to where exactly everything is going to be positioned, and you're drawing the arms and you're having a lot of trouble because it's not uniting the way that you want, it's probably because of that. So it really does help a lot to just put the hand exactly where you want it, and then just draw everything else connecting to it. You might think that sounds a little bit silly, but it works wonders, believe me. So I kind of think this is a general idea of where I want things to be going. That's a general body shape. Let's take it up to where it needs to be as far as how much space it's going to be occupying. And as you can see, it doesn't really occupy that much space. Technically, to save on data, if you're doing like I'm working 800 by 800 just for safety purposes. But if you're making like an actual GIF, you would probably constrain the proportions to wherever the furthest reach of the animation is going to end up being. So if you want to do that later on, you could adjust the canvas size in Photoshop. But for the time being, this is not that big a deal. Flip your canvas and make sure everything is positioned the way it should be. And in this case, it's not really positioned the way it should be. Doesn't matter a whole lot with just this first little generic primary, though. But it doesn't hurt to get it down as quickly as you can, or else you can end up making more mistakes later on. And one of the things that you do need to keep in mind for this stage is what the general shape of their body needs to be, because that's also going to be part of characterization. Like if you're going for someone that's supposed to have more of a more strong, powerful approach, it helps to widen their stance. It helps to keep their shoulders kind of straight. Don't make them slouched. Keep the... You see this little position, this little crosshair right here? Like the chest is kind of pointed this way. Kind of have the chest pointed up if you're evoking that feeling of strength. Same with the position of the eyes and the head. It helps that they're kind of... They have their nose up just a little bit, so that you kind of get the impression of looking upwards towards them, almost like you're a child looking up at an adult or something. It's one of those things that conveys strength and conveys that kind of feeling of either masculinity or power or authority. By that same token, if you're doing something that's supposed to be more kind of, sexy or, seductive or whatever, it helps to have more of a pose that's more focused on the curves. So you would have sort of a more snaky approach to things, which is kind of what I did with Sherry, if I can find her. Well, if it'll actually drag in. Guess it's not going to. Guess it's going to be difficult today. Oh, it doesn't want to open a, GIF inside of Psy is the problem. Can't wait for Psy 2 to come out, so I won't have to deal with that all the time. Like her, you can see her pose is a bit more snaky as far as exaggerating curves, trying to make sure that there's way more or less straight lines and more curved lines in everything that she happens to be doing. Which is why I chose that exact pose for her. Just to put that out there. Alright. But now that I have this done, we can skip ahead a little bit and do a time lapse and focus on kind of fleshing this out, getting her basic design down, and having it look more like this thing. Like this. This is not the final that I want. I'm not going to have her costume kind of look exactly like this. I'm still playing around with it. So we'll do a little time lapse here, and we'll come back to LiveCom whenever I'm actually ready to start worrying about things like line work. But something to keep in mind is that while I'm doing this, I'm going to be thinking about things like characterization. Where she came from, what her beliefs are, and you might think, what does that have to do with anything? But it does translate a lot into their character design, their physical design. It's something that you do need to worry about. So in the process of this time lapse, I might talk a little bit about that, as far as her background and everything goes. Or maybe not, maybe I'll just play stupid music. Who can say? Alright, I'll see you guys in a second. Okay. We're going to be doing quite a few of these little jumping back and forth sort of things. And I guess I will use this time to kind of explain the things that don't really matter exactly. Most of the technical information is going to be handled in the course of my live com. As you can tell from the timeline of this thing, it's going to be a long-ass video as a result. So for the little in-between stuff, what I will do is just give you guys a bit of information on what the character is and so forth. In the context of all these GIFs, they're all from the thing that I'm going to be doing next year, as of the recording of this video. It's going to take quite a bit of explaining, but if you remember back in the day, whenever I made all the kind of Dragon Ball Z girls, if you remember that, when I pointed out how much better it would have been if it had been, if there had just been some female Saiyans. And what if they had invaded Earth instead of Vegeta and Nappa? And I kind of ran along with that idea. I did an Artgrite video based on it. And then I decided, you know what? DBZ does not really deserve this in the first place. It does not deserve this amount of thought put into it. Because it's DBZ, who cares? So I decided, you know what? I'm going to take the thing that I've been meaning to do, which is update my universe that I used to write in, and adapt it for something for the sake of animation. And I decided I will run with it that way. And so I translated all the girls' designs into what you see now. So now, instead of just they're all monkey people like DBZ, now they're a sort of race of almost animalistic people. Kind of not quite as limited. They're not all monkey people, like some of them have traits that are more kind of canine, or they're more feline, or maybe they kind of are more reminiscent of like little raccoons or red pandas, or anything that's sort of that line of thought. And from that point on, I started world building and creating a story and everything for all this to work around. And that's where the event that we're going to be doing next year comes from. It's going to be set in this little universe, and it's going to follow the story that I have sort of laid out. And to that end, I've kind of come up with a bunch of sort of hardline ideas. I don't have a name for the actual, I don't have a Star Wars yet. I don't have a Indiana Jones. I don't have anything like that. I don't have a Dragon Ball. I don't have a titular thing to go by just yet. But the general gist of it is that there are two planets that orbit one another. There's a smaller one called Ison, and there's a bigger one called Aphang. Ison is basically Earth. It has all the Earth rules that we all know and love. It has its own history that's different from Earth and so on, but it's not really that important. Aphang is the weird one. Aphang is a world in which human thoughts can manifest in different ways. It's sort of like a Silent Hill planet. Except it can also be, translated into sort of a DBZ sort of planet. It can be translated into all sorts of different things if I want to tell that certain kind of story. I've just kind of made it that way, but the general gist of it is that if you live there and you kind of think a certain way, then the environment that you're in can end up being translated into that thing. It's kind of a weird narrative thing that way. The girls come from a very, very isolated portion of the planet that is constantly being consumed in natural disasters and so forth. And as a result, they have developed this survival of the fittest way of living. And that's where they get their appearance from. They have lived almost like wild animals for so long that even though they have their own culture and so forth, their physical bodies have changed, and now they look a bit more wild. Like, there's other kind of people that look just like ordinary humans here and there, but in the context of, their group, they have developed animalistic traits over time as a result of all that. So, without going too much into the general gist of the story that we'll be doing next year, the whole premise with this character that we're designing is that she's one of them. Whereas the other ones kind of have, tails and little animal ears and so forth. The girl that we're working with here, whose name is Kieran, she, on the other hand, came from an entirely different area. Like, the land that they populate is called Sonder. And the girls themselves are Sonder. They're Sonder people. Like, they're Saiyans. It's kind of that it. They're Sonder. Like, there's humans, there's Sonder, and there's a bunch of other races that we don't need to go into. But Kieran is from an entirely different land, but she got there quite a long time ago. Like, something happened that I won't go into. She kind of washed up on the shore, so to speak, and slowly over time she has developed the same abilities that the Sonder have. So the only real physical changes that we see in regards to her, as far as compared to an ordinary person, are going to be like her eye color has changed a little bit, makes her look a bit more feral, and her ears have gotten a little bit longer, but that's about it. So as far as physical changes, that's what we're aiming for. Alright, and welcome back all the people on YouTube, all you people in Picarto. This is not really going to make much of a difference to you one way or the other, will it? Oh, but now that we've fiddled around, as you could probably see from the time-lapse, people on YouTube, this took quite a long time to make the smallest and most useless changes. But we have a general idea of where we're going now. Unfortunately, one of the problems of... Actually, let's go through it real fast. We, of course, started with our concept, came up with a generic pose, which looks nothing like what we have now, went back over it with this primary, and we just kept fiddling with it until something actually stuck. So what we're going to do now is go back over it with yet another one. We're going to do this for a very important reason. And that reason is the more that you kind of fiddle with a shape, like if you start out with a, I can't even remember what it looked like exactly, it was just kind of rough, sketchy shapes like this, the more that you keep erasing and adding on top of it and everything, the more that kind of core directions are going to change over time. Like, one of the final things that we actually did was skew the image. Like, she was leaning a little bit too far over here, because the way that you naturally draw it kind of ends up accidentally doing that. So we pulled it over this way a little bit, which actually might be able to stand to do some more. Or not. No, see, that's too much. Make sure you flip that canvas. It's always important. That's more or less okay the way it is, actually. But just for the sake of demonstrating. But you'll notice that whenever you do that, it kind of alters a little bit of the directionality of all the sort of lines of the design. Like, this is supposed to V-point its way kind of down her chest, because it's supposed to create this kind of visual line of a widened shoulder and a torso that's kind of furling off this way as opposed to being curvy. And as we talked about before, that's for the sake of establishing, strength, dominance, blah, blah, blah. So whenever you spend a bit too much time on one layer like this, even though you kind of think, well, I'm done now, you're really not. You need to go back over it one last time. And one of the things that we do need to do is go back over it with a little loose skeleton. And this is for the sake of checking to see that everything is exactly where it needs to be. So let's lay out our basic lines: eye line, nose line, mouth line, just for the hell of it. You can mark ear if you want to. Now it's going to come down into a neck, roll off to the shoulders. Don't just trace what you already have. This may be a little bit difficult. But don't just trace what you have. Try to actually redraw everything that you need to. Like, see, right now, this is not lining up quite the way that it should. And, of course, this will depend on your skill level, too. If you're not used to drawing things in the first place, then this might be a minor problem for you. And of course, as you draw, then you're probably going to end up accidentally drawing a slightly different image too. So don't worry too much about it, but just keep it in mind. Drawing is a lot more difficult than a lot of people realize. And especially with an animation, you need to be extra careful about what it is that you're doing. See? Hand is overreaching a little bit too much. So we do that. Come back up with our arm, which is supposed to be flexing. And you'll notice, by the way, that I put in a lot of just little bitty reminders as to what exactly is supposed to be animating where. Like this is supposed to, I've decided that this is going to swing out here on like frame 5, and it's going to be down here in frame 1, for example. So just keep working with it. I call it a skeleton, but it's not really a skeleton. It's just sort of a mannequin, I guess, is the best way of describing it. And we do this just so that everything can be exactly where it needs to be. Because sometimes you'll overdraw the legs, you'll overdraw the arms. Like, for example, the arm was too long. And the more times that you can do this, just redraw that same drawing over itself over and over again. If it actually lines every single time, that means that everything probably is exactly where it needs to be. Whereas if you keep getting different results, which we're getting slightly different results now because it looks a little bit unnatural, then that means that in the process of redrawing the image over and over again, you fucked up a couple minor things. And you don't want that in the final line work, so you do this, just make absolutely certain that everything is exactly where it needs to be. Of course, flip our canvas, make sure that's okay. I was kind of surprised by this hand right here. I kind of expected this one to be screwed up, but it looks more or less okay. And of course, and this is like frame 5. Amazing. Damn. OBS decided to reset its own volume. Thank you, OBS. Thank you for being loud as shit. Even though I didn't close you, and you shouldn't have raised your own volume. And this is going to be frame 5. This is going to be frame 1 down here. You can draw them together if you want to. We're not going to be using this in the final result anyway, so it doesn't really matter. But again, just concentrate on doing the actual body rather than including any sort of clothing. Like you notice that I've not bothered including like her vest sort of thing, or even her hair, anything like that, because that's not really pertinent to ensuring that this is exactly the way that it needs to be. So everything kind of looks like it should be more or less right here. So now that we have that laid out, I would sort of recommend using another layer and drawing on top of this one, and basically just redrawing everything that you did on that first primary. You may not even have to do this. Like, don't worry too much. Well, I don't do that. It's not overly important. This is more just in case you're kind of fearful that you're not doing things exactly the way that you should. It doesn't hurt to just keep redrawing the same image over and over again, so as long as you don't get completely lost in it. I mean, you eventually have to get it done either way. But in addition to that, you can do things like this right here is supposed to represent her rib cage. I should have added this line, actually. So if you're doing like a woman, or actually men too, I guess, if you need to draw like extra pectoral muscles, or of course the breasts or anything like that, then you add that in at this point too. Make sure that you're uniform with everything else, actually. Actually pull that down a little bit. And especially if you're drawing on a curved surface, then you might have to get up, stand up, and actually see whether or not it's doing it correctly or not. I have one advantage over you guys in that I'm actually looking at OBS at the same time. And OBS displays on a flat surface since I have it on another monitor, which means that I can look at my Cintiq here, which is slanted, and also look at that, which is not slanted at the same time. So just go through and get your basic lines down. And when I say basic lines, I mean, especially if you're making a sort of cartoony design, which is kind of what this is, not worrying too much about realism, then everything has basic line elements to it. Like there's the collar here. Don't worry about like textures or anything like that. Just make sure that everything, all the lines go exactly where they need to go. Because everything, like, there's a basic line here. That's a main divider. There's another one right here. This belt that's supposed to be coming down is another one. Just make sure that everything, like these boots, are another one. Just make sure you get those absolutely where you need them to be before you start worrying about filling in with minor details. Although I'm cheating right now by hitting these things in the bottom of the boot. But other than that, everything should fill out itself pretty nicely by the time that you're through with this. So, you do this to kind of get this general idea down. And then, once you have all the basic stuff set up, then you can go back over it with a detail layer if you really want to, but it's really not necessary, to be honest. For the sake of it, let's have this show up as a frame 5 movement where it's furling out here. And we'll talk more about the idea of where everything should be in terms of when you're animating later on. This is going to take me several days to be able to get done. So this will be a pretty heavy time lapse. And you'll get different variations of me in different moods, I'm sure. But to talk briefly about, I'm sure even, like, me in the future, I'm probably going to have things to say about this too, but there's various reasons why I chose to add specific elements to her. One is that in terms of her design, she, in terms of the narrative and everything, the story, she comes from a group that kind of lives in kind of caves, is very secretive. That group tends to have, like, they wear a lot of long cloth coats, hats, that sort of thing. But she's kind of an outsider in a way, but I did want to bring that in, so I gave her this sort of kind of loose little, like, tied around the waist sort of coat thing going on. That way she would be a little bit uniform with all of them, but not too much. Same thing with the kind of fur, like you'll notice on Emoya and Sharika and Shire. All the Sonder tend to wear this sort of fur on the collar, fur on the shoulders sort of look in various ways. And with her, I didn't want it to be too obvious because, again, she's kind of an outsider to them. She is not naturally from those lands, which you guys may or may not care about, but in regards to character design and everything else, that is important. It's something that you do need to consider. So kind of reducing that a little bit serves itself pretty well and actually making her look a little bit different, but at the same time, just similar enough to indicate that she's not from another place. Alright. Let's see. There's something important that I was also going to mention. A very good example of doing all this would be fighting games. Like, imagine if you were playing a fighting game. You're designing for a fighting game. Like, say, it's Street Fighter. You have, Ryu and then Cammy, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, there's like a Final Fantasy character. Just like Bahamut is just there for some reason. And you might think, oh, that's awesome. I'd love to play as Bahamut and beat up Ryu or whatever the hell it is. But that's not really appropriate. You have to exercise some level of restraint in your design. You can't just pour everything into a big grab bag. And this kind of goes along with writing, too. Don't just throw things in just for the hell of it. And, like, there's a thing called movie fights on YouTube, and ever so often people will pitch ideas for movies. And a lot of them are absolutely awful, because they'll say things like, what if, we put Godzilla fighting Jedi on top of a building, and also there's a crossover with Die Hard. Just ninja / pirate / robot / alien, that kind of thing, where you just throw everything together. It has no thematic cohesion, it has no design cohesion. Don't do it. Don't do it because it makes it extremely ugly, it makes it just turn into a giant mess, and you don't need that. Um, and so whenever you are designing these things, you do need to keep things like that in mind. The whole idea that, you know, where's this person from? What are their beliefs? What would they wear? What's their personality like? Those are all important questions, and the more love that you put into it, the more people will notice it later on once you're actually through with the design. So don't just take a big old dump on top of it and say, whatever, it's cool. That's not really how you should be doing things. I know it's very easy to slip into that, but try to avoid it at all costs. Alright, but that's more of the design portion of things. We can go ahead and merge this, I guess it's not overly important. So now you notice we have a sort of more finalized primary for this. Turn that off real fast. We're losing a lot of the details though, so you might want to keep that other one around. I never delete my primaries. So we have this, and we have this. And you notice how much more out of alignment this one is, but it has more details. So one thing that we can do is go back over it and just keep adding the details in, but I think what I'm actually going to do is to not really mind that too much. And I'll probably just kind of hard shift this into the same color spectrum, but reduce its opacity so that it kind of blends in with the one that's below it. Which I'm used to, you guys might have a hard time seeing through it though. So what I'm going to do now is actually work back over on top of this, looking at kind of the details that are under this, while following the primary 3, which I should be naming there, to make the final line work. Okay, before we even begin the final line work, this is very important. You need the plan. Planning is very important. I'm going to go ahead and make 5 different folders. And this is going to be frame 1, if I can spell correctly. I'm trying to type too quickly. This is going to be frame 1. The other ones are going to be frame 2, frame 3, frame 4, and frame 5. What I do, you don't have to do this all the same way, but this makes it a lot easier for me. I am going to contain... Actually, I don't... Since I have to duplicate the folders anyways, I really don't need these other ones. What I'm going to do is I'm going to contain each major area that's going to be moving to its own folder. And this might seem like it's extra busy work, but believe me, it's going to pay off much later on. Because a lot of these things, like, say, her arm obviously is going to be moving so much that you're probably going to have to redraw this every single frame. Like frame 1, frame 2, frame 3, frame 4, frame 5. But say, like, her legs, for example. Let's just go ahead and call this the leg later. If she's kind of just bobbing just a little bit, then these kind of boots right here, if I can get, there we go. These kind of boots right here are probably not going to move at all across every single frame. Frame 1, frame 2, frame 3, frame 4, frame 5. They're probably never going to change. The information is never going to change. So it's much easier to just contain this to its own folder. That way, whenever you start making the other layers, like, let's say that we got done with this one, we could just copy this leg folder and just put it into the next frame. That way we don't even have to bother with it. It because this is very important. Like, let's do a quick demonstration real fast. Let's say that we have like a ball bouncing or something, like frame 1, frame 5. This is keyframing, by the way. Whenever we talk about keyframing, you're making the most important frames in the animation, which is going to be usually anyways, it's going to be the first one, the last one, then you do the middle one, and after that, then you do the in-betweens. We're working with 5 frames, so the very last ones you would do would be this one and this one. That way, actually, this is not even an even balance, but you get the idea. Because you notice that all these don't look exactly the same. If, say, 16 be fine. Whereas if you take the same exact thing and then just copy it, and then just move it, then it never shifts even the smallest pixel, so it always looks uniform, which means that if it's something that you don't have to bother, changing too much, then that's going to pay off in the long run, because you don't have to stress out about whether or not it looks any different or not. So, to that end, that's the reason why that you want to try to ensure that you carry over as much as you possibly can, because if you're drawing, like, say, a single line, like that or something, and there's like the belt for the boot or something, if you do that once and then you try to do it again, let's bring the opacity down on this actually. If I try to do the exact same strokes yet again, then you'll notice that I'm not picking up the exact same pixels. And you might think, well, that's really exact. You don't have to worry about it too much. You really do. You want to make sure that each and every one of these is exactly the same, because if it's not moving, it should not be moving. And if it is moving even a little bit, you have to make sure that it's absolutely consistent. So if, say, there's... let's just copy it, actually. It's the best way of showing this off. If, say, you have two exact copies of one another, and your line strokes are just impeccable, but on this one there's like a few extra bits of information right there. Whenever you animate it, you can actually see that pick up. Like, you see these little pixels just suddenly appear and vanish in the middle of the animation on like frame 2 or something, which looks really, really bad. So that's the reason why you want to make sure that everything is consistent as possible, especially whenever it's something that's barely moving at all. Like this, her fist coming up is going to be the thing that is going to be animating the very most. So it's the thing that you're probably going to be able to get away with the most on. Say if you make like a stroke here or something, and then your frame 2 is going to be like here, frame 3, frame 4, and then frame 5 or whatever. You go up that high, it doesn't matter. Then people really aren't going to notice too much if there's like a stray pixel here or there, right? But if it's something that never moves, like again the boots, which in this case they're really not going to be moving because she's not going anywhere, then even if you have a stray one, then it's really, really easily noticed by the viewer. So for that reason, sometimes it's a lot easier to animate things that are in motion than it is to animate something that is not in motion. So, for that reason, that's the reason why we're containing everything to their own folders. It gets really, really, it becomes a big problem very, very quickly. Alright, do I have that? Where did my primary go anyways? I must have accidentally... No, that's right. I didn't merge it down, did I? I may have accidentally deleted that layer or something. It doesn't really matter too much. Whoop, see, there it is. Okay, well, let's keep that there. But you get the idea. So what I'm going to be doing is working on frame 1 right now. And I will be containing all these individual areas to their own folders, so that way I can move them over as easily as possible. Like, for example, her boots are not going to move, but her upper legs might. Like on frame 5, instead of the line being down here, it might be like up here. And that's not much at all. But it's just enough so that if you have a folder with, that line in it already, if you copy it over to frame 3 and then frame 5 or something, then you can just go into this program or Photoshop and just move it up just a little bit, and then you'll be done. You don't have to redraw the whole thing. Makes it much easier. But just keep in mind, especially like this cloth, for example, which is going to be a minor problem, that this is going to be shifting and moving as she moves with it. So the more that she kind of has light movements, the more I'm going to have to, like, if there's like a little bitty line right here that's meant to signify the way that the cloth folds or something, then I will have to kind of move that just a little bit. I can't just move it up. I can't copy it and do what I did just a second ago and just move it up like this. I would actually have to change the way that it angles just a little bit so that it looks natural. Things to keep in mind. Whereas, of course, with everything else up here, then it's probably not going to be changing quite as much. So that's how everything is going to be working. The only other thing that I want to mention is that you need to make sure that everything is contained to folders that correspond to what it is exactly that you're going to be moving. Like, for example, even though she has 2 different legs, obviously, we can probably just keep this to one folder, because none of this is going to move anyways. we can just name this particular layer the boots layer, and then just draw it out, and then that'll be it. And the next one that will probably be moving will probably be these legs. It'll move a little bit. The belt might, even though the belt is kind of in the same area, and the hand is in the same area, and this little skirt is in the same area, they will be moving individually from her thighs. So we actually have to keep these also to their own layers. That way we can move them independently of one another. So you'll actually draw all of her pants. And then once you're done with that, and it's contained to its own folder, you'll make another folder or another layer, however you want to work, on top of it that has just like this belt, for example. And you'll put like the hand on top of that belt layer, wherever you want it to be. And just keep in mind that, you know, the things that need to be on top visually are going to be the layers that are on top of the other layers. Things like this are going to be a challenge because they move both in front of things, potentially, and behind them at the same time. And just coming up with a way of making sure that looks okay is part of the problem solving of it. Like in this case, for example, I could probably make this part of it part of this torso area right here. Like I will probably make a folder for the lower part of her upper torso and the upper part of her upper torso because they're going to be moving at different rates. So I'll probably make this little part of that lower torso area and just not draw any lines right here. And then after that, I might either have a single animating layer that is just this little portion right here sitting on top of it, or I could actually kind of bleed over the colors without using any lines, like this, for example. Like, imagine if this was red, and just kind of have that sitting there. That way, whenever you animate something under it, then, you know, it just ends up feeding together with itself, and you don't have to worry about whether or not it's one whole piece or not. That may make more sense to you as we go on, though. So don't fret about that too much. But just keep in mind that all of this is problem solving. A lot of it is going to be based on layers and so on. Or you can completely ignore this whole layer system that I'm doing and just redraw every single frame just by copying and pasting it over and over again. The problem there is that sometimes things will move just enough. Like, what would be a good example? Anything that doesn't move up and down or over across. Anything that moves like this. That moves kind of on a diagonal path. Which might be like the hair. It could be this arm. It's definitely going to be this thing. Then you might get something that is going to have to be moved like this. And that means that you won't be able to copy and paste it. And then, you know, turn it. Because look at the quality of this line. I'm using binary pen for a reason. It really condenses the amount of information that you get from the final product. Like if you're making an animated GIF, you want to make sure that it's as small as possible. You don't want it to be like 5 megabytes or something. So whenever you are doing this using binary, since it's just either black or it's nothing, like there's no interlacing or anything, then that's going to restrict the amount of information that you have to worry about. So if you even turn it even a little bit, then notice what it does to that binary line. Suddenly it becomes aliased. The resolution is lost, and now you have more information than you actually need. And more than that, it's inconsistent with the rest of the lines that you have drawn next to it. You can tell that it's not the same exact thing. So if you're doing little light things where it's just barely moving at all, then that can become a real problem. But either way, even if you're only going by layers, like if you're just redrawing frame 1, frame 2, frame 3, 4, and 5 as their own layers and coloring in the same layer and shading in the same layer and everything like that, then you're going to have a lot of erasing on your hands, and it's going to become a minor nightmare. Whereas if you just contain the layers, then you still have to do the same thing, but it's not as big of a problem. Okay. But that's all I have to say about that in regards to what work I have ahead of me. So now we're going to do another time skip. Jump ahead into the future, and you guys will hopefully see me finishing this first frame. And after I finish the first frame, which is going to be line work, and then there will be a subset of layers for the color below the line work, and then another set for the shading, maybe. I might shade on the same one, but I doubt it. Another for shading, and then I'll have another layer for the lighting effects. Just make sure that you look for them in the layers ahead of time. You'll be able to make them out even through the time-lapse. Okay, but that's all I want to say about that. Let's get started. Okay, we're back with more of this explanation of the Sonder and the girls in general. Alright, without giving away too much of the story, I've already explained that Ison is, the small planet. Aphang is the big planet, right? There's two planets orbiting each other. And, of course, Aphang is the one that is sort of the weird Silent Hill planet in the sense that your thoughts can actually influence the environment around you. It sort of works that way with people, too. That's where they get their abilities from. If you're renowned for being very fast, then it can, you actually have that trait within you exacerbated, and you can end up being even faster. So, as a result, if you, takes a human being that's lived in the Sonderlands for, 50 years, and took them to Ison, which is, sort of like Earth, it's pretty much just Earth, and put them down there, then they would be really, really, really fucking fast compared to any human being that you would ever find. Kind of the same idea with anyone that would be very physically strong, like a big, muscle-bound guy. It would work the same way. You take him and put him on Ison or Earth or whatever, and they would just be insanely strong. They wouldn't be as fast as that guy that you brought that was known for being very fast, but he would still probably be way faster than your average human. It kind of works that way. I'm not going to overcomplicate introducing you to the idea of lethality, but I'll explain briefly where the idea comes from. It comes from the Old English term ethel, which is a word that we don't use anymore. The French basically conquered England for all intents and purposes a few centuries ago. And that basically corrupted the English language from what we consider to be quote-unquote English, is what its modern kind of connotation is. And now we have English as we speak it today. A lot of the words that we use are actually French in origin now. Probably one of the more famous examples that people use is like pork and ham and all the different words that we have for, pig meat, because it was used by the upper class versus the lower class and so on. If you want to research that, go for it. Knock yourself out. But there used to be an Old English word before that era called ethel. And ethel was basically the concept of inherent greatness. Except it wasn't just greatness, it was sort of a noble greatness. It was something that was usually used to describe, kings and queens, royal lines. Like they had an inherent greatness about them that other people didn't have. It was something that was natural to them. It was natural greatness. And that word was also used, ethel was also used, to describe the natural world. That is like a forest, its natural beauty, its natural splendor. It would have that natural ethel to it, its natural greatness. And I kind of have taken that word and made it into my own, kind of modernized the pronunciation and turned it into ethelity. And ethelity is basically just that. It's just your natural greatness. Whatever it is about you that makes you naturally great in some way, that is your ethelity. Your natural greatness, your ethel. And that's where all the survival of the fittest sort of stuff comes in with the Sonder. They live in this world that is being constantly, this area anyways, is sort of like Upper Africa or something might be ravaged with, heat waves and stuff, or the Pacific areas might have a lot of problems with typhoons or so on. The Sonder areas have their own weather problems. They have lots of tornadoes and incoming hurricanes, huge winds, storms constantly. Having light rain would be a clear day for the Sonder. So, this has sort of done them in as a race, for the most part. Uh, Over the eons, they have tried to survive all of these natural occurrences, and they've done it in various ways, and that has created this natural lethality in all of them. They've survived in different ways, so they've gotten better at certain things. All of them, as a result, though, are all very strong because they're known for being strong amongst themselves. It's the world has taken that natural trait of that survival of the fittest, their desire to live, their desire to fight and to survive, and their natural strength that they have gained in surviving, and exacerbated, and that's why they're so naturally strong now. So, with the girls, they have inherited this from their own ancestors. And now they're naturally strong. They've survived with their own. They have developed their own sort of reputations, and they have earned their own natural lethality from that. Other areas of the world, this is kind of chasing a rabbit here, but other areas of the world are kind of the same thing, but they may not necessarily have like really bad weather or something. So the world exacerbates other traits, like if the world that you the world the like nation or whatever that you live in is known for being naturally like horrific in some ways, like people do really bad things to one another, then those traits within people that respond to that may be exacerbated. So you might end up with a nation that is nothing but it's just Silent Hill kind of logic all the time, just horrific things happening constantly. Or you can wind up with some place that's like completely consumed with deviance, and it's just a nation of nothing but like, sex and breeding, and they completely have lost themselves. They have no culture anymore because they just become mindless breeding animals for one another. And they just devolved it as a culture to the point where they're on the brink of not even existing anymore as human beings. And I kind of have set up the world this way so that I can tell whatever story that I want to. Like if the thing that I'm going to do next year goes beyond just that one little thing that I do, then I can write up all sorts of different stories and adventures for them to go on. But that's another thing entirely. Nothing really to be overly concerned about. But as far as the girls go, as you can imagine, with them living in a land like this that's so completely consumed with, horrific weather, constant infighting, killing one another over, food and resources and whatnot, they're very violent people. Like I said, they were based sort of loosely on the Saiyans, and, this kind of follows that same line of thought. They are conquerors, they're fighters, they don't really think a whole lot of, ethical quandaries and whatnot. If they need to do something to survive, they will do that, and that's pretty much the end of it. And that's going to be sort of part of the plot that I'm going to be running with in the future. But this influences their character in a great way. And so, linking this together with what we're watching here, as far as designing your characters go, and as far as designing this character goes, there's something to consider. Because all the girls are, it's not just a nation of women. That's another thing entirely. They don't have many men because they sent a lot of their men off to a fairly recent war that accidentally got them all wiped out. So they actually have very few men left. And even their women and men fight side by side, so a lot of them were also wiped out in the process. So now they just have a very low population. Whereas before they had a very low population, now it's almost non-existent. So they're in a real crisis, and that's kind of where the story stems from. But anyways, all the people that are naturally native to those lands, the Sonder, they are naturally, like I said, very violent and so on and so forth. Now, Kieran here, she actually, as I mentioned, comes from a different land. She's not from their specific lands. Like I said, you could have Silent Hill world over here. You could have crazy sex craze mania place over here. You could have what's another philosophy that I run with? I have different ones for different things. You could have one that's based on the concept of secula that I'm not even gonna bother trying to explain all this. This is like years from now stuff that no one needs to worry about. That are concerned more with destroying societies that have existed for too long, that need to be reset, and, just lives in constant turmoil because everyone is nothing but a vagrant that's constantly trying to reinvent themselves and so on. There's all these different places that you can come from, and she's sort of, washed up on the shore, so to speak, like I said. And as a result, she has a different set of beliefs, a different way of practicing how she lives, how she survives. But like the Sonder, she has, over time, had to, fight against the natural environment, had to fight against other people. So she has started to take on those traits. She has her own ability. She has her own strength, her own accomplishments, her own deeds. But they are all things that she has had to have earned herself. As far as her physical design goes, she doesn't look quite like the rest of them. Like, even her kind of costume looks a bit more, kind of Terran in the sense that, she has, like, normal pants. She doesn't really wear a uniform. I try to make it almost sort of like the other ones. Like, it obviously looks kind of Sonder-y, if I can use that word. It has little bitty elements, like the Sonder usually have that kind of fur that's sticking out on their shoulders, from things that they've killed. And that's a very present design element on all the Sonder. With her, it's just barely there, like on the very tufts of, like, the outside edges of, her sort of sleeveless jacket/shirt thing that I gave her. And her eyes are like a little bit orange to signify, she's kind of becoming a little bit more animalistic, a little bit more wild. The tips of her ears are sort of elongating just a little bit. And she basically looks how the Sonder would have looked eons ago. Like whenever the first sort of normal human beings arrived there and slowly began to devolve into what the Sonder are today, that's what they probably would have looked like. And as a result, her personality is also different. As you might be able to tell from her expression, she is not really she's not really a comical person. She's very serious. Whereas the other Sonder might be given to, like, partying and having a good time, in some cases, because they're kind of used to their own lifestyle. She grew up in a very dire sort of situation. Like, if you took a normal person and threw them into this nightmare landscape, they would grow up the same way. They would end up being very serious, very focused on what they need to do to survive, maybe emotionally distant and so on, and that's kind of how she is. In the process of actually designing her, you may have spotted it in the chat comments, but especially whenever we got to the hair color, like I think I've mentioned this, but she was based off an early character called Cynthia/Kitty, who eventually became Jael in that webcomic that I used to do, and now she's Kieran. But she had always had black hair, and I decided at this point that I kind of wanted something a little bit different for her, but I wanted her to maintain her dark skin tone. I just really like the look for her. And so I kept playing with it until we kind of settled on blonde. I did some straw polls with the chat. And I kept adjusting it until we got sort of this platinum look that she has. And people started joking that she looks like she is the boss from Metal Gear. The Joy, the person that trained Big Boss that eventually ended up being succeeded by Snake, as we know him. And she sort of has the same personality in some ways. Like, she's an expert at CQC. She handles things with her fists mainly. Like, a lot of the other Sonder may specialize in one thing. Like, Moya is sort of focuses in her own training on sort of augmenting her own body. And fire, she controls fire. is sort of her speciality, along with the rest of her people, her own family. And Shere, meanwhile, sort of specializes in light and illusions and things like that. Kieran here does not do any of that sort of fancy stuff. She's just straightforward, just a brawler. Like, there's a few things that her master Ethan has taught her, but she's pretty straightforward. You know, she is more focused on outsmarting people, disarming them, getting them into holds and things like that. Like, if anyone was represented as being sort of an earthling fighter, you know, like if you took a normal person that was an expert in fighting on Earth and put them down there, then it would basically be her. Like, she is the expert in sort of martial combat. And, as a result, she is kind of well respected amongst other Sonder for, despite the fact that she doesn't have, like, despite the fact that she's so straightforward, she's still very accomplished and very strong. And despite the fact that she's from other lands, she's still, you know, very accomplished. And the fact that she is from other lands is also something that isn't widely known, but is something that, amongst especially her own people, Aiton's people, is considered to be quite interesting, because almost no one comes from beyond the lands of Sonder. Because it's almost impossible to leave those lands, because of the horrific weather. Like, if you go north, then you basically freeze to death, because it's just nothing but icy tundras for, you know, just thousands of miles. And Avang, by the way, is a massive planet. And if you go south, then there are giant people. Like, there are people that are sort of related to the Sonder in the sense that they survive by survival of the fittest. But they took a different sort of route, and they exacerbate their own inherent strength, and they made themselves into sort of giant people. And they live in a land of giants. So if you go down there, then you might just die, and that's what happened to all the other Sonder. They declared war on the giants, which was a really bad idea. And to the east and the west are both just huge expanses of ocean, to the point that it's considered to be impossible to traverse it. And also horrific storms are all over the place. So actually, her showing up from seemingly out of nowhere is very rare, and as a result, she's considered to be quite special. And that's also one of the reasons why that the plot kicks off, because they are unable to really leave the Sonder lands in the first place. But anyways, you guys get the idea. Back to business.
Day 2. In case you can't tell, day 1 didn't go so great. Didn't go so great because I streamed too long and I worked too long in one session. And also, for some reason, I have a sore throat now, and I don't know why. I probably ate a rat or something in my sleep. That's probably what it was. But some things to note about Kieran here. As far as the color theory goes, it's not really pertinent to the animation process, but it's still pertinent to character building and whatnot. I probably have explained a lot of this in post-com in between, but as far as the assembly of all these various parts, you can see the way I've done it here. Like, this hand R, is the right hand, technically. Although technically, since I flipped the image because I like it better facing this direction, I decided. So this is actually inverted. I need to rename these. But pretend this says hand L. So, actually, I guess it could be hand on our right side, so it's still correct. Yes, I'm always right. But on the right side, her hand, you'll notice that I have, like, this is the line layer. Like, if I turn this off and on, then this is just the line. It's nothing but little black lines. Under it is the sort of dark shading for the little strap area. I called it strap because all the other straps are that color. I want to make sure that they're all named similarly so that I can find them easily. Under that is the base color for it. And under that, we have the same exact sort of thing, except now it's metal. Metal C2, metal C for color, and then the second color, which is the shading portion. And then under that is the wrapping. You just have to make sure that they're layered correctly so that you can see all of them at the same time. Now, technically, you could just merge all these down into a single color layer, and it's not going to affect anything. It's just however you want to work. I wanted to work this way just to make absolutely certain that everything was just the way that it needed to be. That said, would be a good example of this, probably the torso, upper torso. That said, you'll notice like on the upper torso, we have the little lines for the little tufts that she has, which are going to have to be animated. Below that, of course, the dark area for its coloration and its base color. And you'll notice that if I turn that off, then you get sort of it kind of bleeds with the line of everything that's under it. This is one of the cases that if you did merge like everything down, it would make things a lot more complicated. Because since like her general chest, the reason why like I'm in Photoshop right now because it's much easier to move things like 1 pixel or 2 pixels than it is in Paint Tool Psi. Paint Tool Psi is very uncooperative about that. So I usually take it into Photoshop for this sake. Plus we have to end up animating it in Photoshop anyways, unless we have like a batch file or something. So you don't have to worry too much about that. But you notice if I just tap up or down on my arrow keys, then I can move this up or down just barely. And that will allow me to, like if she's breathing or something, then I can just move it up 1, 2, and then that'll be like frame 5, and then on frame 3 it'll move down to this, and then frame 1 it'll be back down to this again. Very, very easy. You don't have to worry about redrawing the same thing over and over and over again. But in the process of doing that, you're going to have to redraw like these little tufts, because I'm going to have these kind of blowing in the wind a little bit. Same thing with like this little wrapping down here. I'm going to have that moving back and forth. Her hair is going to be moving back and forth. Her arm, of course, is going to be the most animated thing, as I said before. This little thing right here is going to be moving back and forth. And if I had the time, which I probably won't, then her pants need to ruffle a little bit, but not too much. And her boots won't be moving at all. So, the reason why it's good to have everything kind of individually layered, like in this circumstance, is that you're going to have to redraw these. I see I got rid of them just there. You have to redraw these completely. So just having them all set individually means that everything that's under it, aside from this one little dead pixel right here, will be contained, so you can just keep moving it around like it's nothing. You know, it doesn't even matter. Something to note, don't start animating it and then drawing. Animate all the things that are going to move before you start moving the things up and down like this. I know you might think it's the other way around, but it isn't. And the reason for that is because whenever you start moving these things, like if I were to move this up by 1, like this, like say that's our next, like that's going to be frame 2. If I did that and then started trying to redraw these little tufts, which I have to do anyways, then I might accidentally, like especially if I'm doing this, like there's something in animating called onion skin layering, or just onion skins, and Photoshop does not have this ability, unfortunately. But you probably have seen me do it in Toon Boom if you've ever seen me work in Toon Boom. But basically, it just takes whatever the frame before the animation was. Like if there's frame 1, frame 2, frame 3, blah blah blah. Then if you're working on frame 2 and you're already done with frame 1, then that little onion skin will make that first frame kind of faded. Like it'll do sort of this effect. Or it'll turn it red or something, however it works. And that means that you can now work over it and see exactly the stuff that's under it. Like, if you were going to... Let me get a pen real fast. Actually, I don't even need to really draw it. But if you were going to start redrawing this layer, you might very carefully go back over it like that. But since you have already moved this up, if you need to redraw anything else around it, there's just a greater likelihood that you're not going to match it exactly the way that it should be matched. So it's actually in your best interest. Just F12, get everything back down to where it should be. F12 resets everything back to its original setting before you on its last save in Photoshop. Then at that point, it'll be a lot easier to work with if you just keep it. If you keep everything exactly where it needs to be, and just animate, like I'm going to have her hand. Like, I'm going to animate her hand clenching, I'm going to animate her expression changing, and her hair moving and all this stuff before I start doing, like, this business of moving everything up and down. And that's just for safety reasons. You can work around that, but, you know, it's one of those things where I really wouldn't recommend it exactly, but if someone says that they can do it, you know, I would probably believe them. It's not that huge a deal, but it's nice. On the other ones, I didn't actually make it this complicated. Like, I didn't have, you know, tough, then tough, C2, and then C. I actually just made all their lines. Like, each one of these folders would just contain nothing except for, like, the hand line. And the arm lower line, for example. And then what I would do is just merge all the lines together. And then after I did that, I would just go through and wand select. It won't let me do it in Photoshop, it would in Sci. I would just go through and wand select like all the individual areas now that I had erased all those lines down. And just fill in all the areas with color, which would make the coloring a lot easier. This actually is more work in the long run, but it actually makes the future frames a lot easier because you don't have to worry about recoloring anything ever again. Whereas the old way I did it, then I would have to basically I would have to keep this original frame around, copy it to the new one, redraw what I needed to, and then merge it back down again, and then just redo everything, which could turn into a minor nightmare, because you would end up having to make the exact same strokes for, you know, the shading and everything else, which I would do by just copying and pasting from a single, like there wouldn't be, you know, hand C2 and belt C2 for the shading and blah blah blah. What I would do is just, I would make a single layer and just call it, you know, shading or whatever, and just do all the shading of that one layer, and then whenever I needed to move it to the next layer, I'd just copy and paste it, and since nothing really moves all that much, then everything would be perfectly aligned, more or less, aside from one or two little things, which I could just lasso out and move up and down. But this way is much easier. The only time it's never that it's going to be not as easy is if everything's moving a whole lot, and it's like casting shadows and stuff. Like, as this waves, I'm probably going to have to adjust the shadow on her shoulder and whatnot. Just little things like that. Like, there's a shadow I'll probably forget about in the final product. Where actually there should be a shadow casting from this little clasp right here that's supposed to be blowing back and forth ever slightly. And I'll have to draw that on every single frame too. Although I didn't do it this time because I knew I'd forget about it. And I would rather forget about it and have it not be there rather than have there be a shadow there that never moves at all. But anyways, that's the gist of how this is going to work. The only thing that I haven't really done yet is add a light layer for anything. Like, I want to go back through and add like some light on her hair, maybe some on the metal. But as for everything else, like cloth and everything, it's probably unnecessary. So that'll be fun, definitely. Alright, but that's the general idea. Whenever you're ready to go on to the next frame, what you do is you go into Photoshop. You can do it in Psy, but Psy, you can't duplicate groups in Psy for some reason. You would have to go in and copy and paste every single layer and put them entirely in a new place. Whereas in Photoshop, you can just copy the group and you're done. It's a difference of like a couple seconds as opposed to like an hour of work. Since Psy is fucking stupid about that. But you just go in, you make a copy, call it frame 2, and then you would start drawing. You would take this back into Psy if you're working this way, or you can do it in Photoshop if you're using like the pencil tool, which looks almost exactly the same as a binary tool in Psy, but it's less exact. It creates a little bit of aliasing on the outside. Actually, let's show it. It does create a little bit of aliasing, as you can see, so you have to be very careful about it, which is the reason why I don't use Photoshop for this. It's just not reliable enough. So you just go in and don't move anything yet, again. And then you would go in and say, like, this needs to move over here. You know, just have everything kind of slowly move over, and you would just fix this entire grouping. You would fix all of frame 2 exactly the way that you need it. Like her arm's going to move up and so forth and so on. And you just keep doing that and adding all the little things that are going to be changing over time. You know, blah, 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 blah. And once you have all those redrawn and all of them reshaded, then you would save it. Go back into Photoshop once again, then duplicate a frame 3. Well, actually, really, you should be working by keyframes, so I'm telling you guys something incorrect. Really, you should go to frame 5. Well, I'll say that for a second. But anyways, you get the idea. You just keep duplicating whatever frame it is that's closest to it. Like if you're making frame 2, you should probably just copy frame 1 or frame 3. Whereas if you're making frame 4, you would be better off copying frame 5 or frame 3. And then work from that. But like I said about the keyframing thing, the next frame that I'm actually going to start on once I'm done with this is going to be frame 5. And you might think, why not start at frame 2? And this is because you need to start with your keyframes first. And I've explained this before. But you need to start with the most important parts of the movement of the entire character. So in this case, like her expression's going to change, I'll have to redraw that. Things like her hand is going to be clenched. It's going to come on now. It's going to end up being clenched, so I have to redraw this anyways. And it'll come up here, and again, remember whenever I was talking about the whole idea of you can't turn things diagonally without it blurring? See what it does to it? Yeah, I'm going to have to redraw all of this. Like every single frame, I'm going to have to redraw all of it. This is how it works. That is how it works. And that's going to have to move up too. So it'll end up being something like this. You get the idea? And that'll be part of frame 5. And that way, once you have frame 5 done, you'll have frame 1 done, and then you'll have frame 5. And those will be your keyframes. And at that point, the other ones become much easier because the only thing that you're doing is just working in between them. At this point, though, you don't start at frame 2. Like, you don't go frame 1, 5, then 2, 3, 4. What you do is you go frame 1, frame 5, then frame 3, because it's the thing that's in between them. This is what in-betweening is in animation. They have people that are... Like, usually this is how it works in animation studios. Usually there is a guy called, he's the head animator, but he doesn't actually animate anything. What he does is he basically does these primaries, is what he does. He just goes through and draws all the major keyframes out in this very loose, kind of pencil-y style. And then once he has all those done, which that's a lot of work, by the way, that he does not have an easy job at all. Then once they have that done, then they have their keyframe people come in and draw those individual keyframes. And then after that, they will hand them down to their in-betweeners, who basically, since their in-between frames are not quite as important as the keyframes are, and because like we were talking about before about how, especially if something is moving very fast, then it's easier to kind of get away with the drawing not being quite as good, or it being a little bit blurred, or whatever it happens to be, because the eye naturally sees movement that way. Like, people like to make fun of what they call smear frames in animation, like they'll freeze frame an animation, and like someone's eyes are like coming out from here, and they're like one big eye, and like their whole face is doing like this or something. I think the Superman cartoon that used to air back in the 90s was very famous for this, because Superman moves very fast. And that's because the human eye naturally blurs things whenever things move. TV technology is catching up to this too. Right now, most televisions that are kind of high resolution actually show things a little bit too high frame rates. It looks unnatural to the human eye because nothing is blurring. If you see something in real life, the human eye, like if something moves across your field of vision very quickly, what happens is that, you know, if you were to freeze frame that, which is impossible obviously, but if you were to freeze frame it, then you would kind of just see this blurred image of all the colors mixing together, because your brain just, you know, it can't keep up that quickly. It's just trying, what it's doing is it's in-betweening everything that you see. It takes the amount of information it gained from this point and this point, and is just filling everything in between it in with colors that mix together, so that everything blurs. So whenever you're doing this in animation, it works the same exact way. You don't want everything to be clean. You don't want every single thing, if it's moving fast. If it's moving slowly, obviously, then you do want it to be as clean as possible. But if, say, she were doing this very, very quickly, like she took her arm and snapped it all the way up to frame 5, instead of over 5 frames, it was more like, you know, like one frame, or, you know, 2 frames, which I might have to do. It kind of depends on how good or bad it ends up looking. Then I would add a little bit of blur. Like I would take like this color and just kind of add that in on the side or something, you know, just on like frame 3 I would do this. It just had that little bit of color, so it kind of looks like it's blurring. And I say that all that just to, you know, give you a rough idea of, you know, what you're going to end up having to do across each one of these frames. Again, frame 1 keyframe, frame 5 keyframe, then go to frame 3, because it's going to need to be the endpoint, and that's going to be easy. Like, that's the reason why they have in-betweeners. It's because the in-between work is not that complicated. It's kind of complicated, but it's not that complicated. And once you have that, after you have your keyframes, it becomes a lot easier, just because the work becomes very menial. You don't have to think about it too much at that point. The only thing that you're really doing is just, you know, looking at, there's no real good way of showing this, I guess, without going into every single folder. But if you're just looking at the lines, for example, then all you're doing is just seeing, you know, here's this line that I drew for this part of the arm. Let's change color. And then there's this same exact line, except now it's up here. So on frame 3, the only thing you need to do is just redraw that same exact line, except it's in the middle of those two. And that's it. That's all you do. And then on frame 4, it would be in between the one on frame 3, and then on frame 2, it would be the one in between frame 2 and frame number 1 frame. And you just keep doing that until you're done. It's very, very simple. it's just very, very tedious. And setting it up, as you can see, can be problematic. The advantage of doing a little bitty animation like this is that you can, set up like all your colors and stuff contained in folders and whatnot. Whereas if you were actually doing like animation studio work, if you're actually doing animation studio work, then you would have to just draw the entire picture, by hand, the entire frame by hand, which thankfully most of the time you're not drawing a full person like this with that much detail. You would have to do all of that by hand and just have your line work. It would look, imagine if that was just the line work. It would just be this. And then you would have someone, a colorist, come in and actually take care of it later on. And just go under that initial line work stage. But you get the idea. It is very tiring. One more thing, I guess, to say about working this way. Keeping everything, like, not moving anything up or down. Hold on. Not moving... That's weird. Never had to do that before. Oh, maybe that's... okay. No? Huh, I don't know. It's never done that before. Oh, because the entire area is selected. Yeah, okay. Anyways, you can see. And Photoshop does not handle layer or groups like this in layers. Like, there's a lot of layers in this entire group. So Photoshop might have a bit of problem if you're working like I do. Like, it might slow down a little bit, especially if you don't have a very good computer for this sort of thing. But this is it lined right now. The good thing about working, like, if you take the whole group and lower its opacity, this is sort of like working with an onion skin. So what you can actually do is just work this way so that you can actually see under what you're doing. Otherwise, if you can't see what you're doing, as far as what's under you and what's over you, then you're going to have a much worse time of it. Another thing that you can do, you can only really do this in... Well, I take that back. I guess you can do it in Psy, but it's a bit of a pain in the ass. But you can, like, say, make a... To make this easier, you can go up to layer and then make, like, an adjustment layer that, say, maybe applies hue and saturation. Oh, yeah, it needs to create it first. There we go. And then do something like this and have it colorize it. And since it's only contained within this folder, and this folder is not set to pass through, like if you wanted everything to, like if you wanted to affect everything under it, then you would set it to pass through, in the case of Photoshop. But we'll just turn it to normal so that it only affects everything that's in this folder and nothing else. Then you can change it like this, and it will turn everything into this kind of same color if you have the colorize thing tick. If you just change the hue like this, then it'll shift the hue spectrum, by the way. Just colorize it, and that may make it a little bit easier on you. As far as how to do that in Paint Tool Psy, it's a bit more complicated, I think. Or it may not be, I don't know. But maybe the easiest way of doing it would just be to set a multiply layer like this. And thankfully in Paint Tool Psy you can actually select... You can select a group, like if you click on the main group folder and then wand select, then it'll just select anything that is not within this folder. Like if I haven't drawn a line out here, then it won't select that area. You can't do that in Photoshop for some bizarre reason. But you can do that, get rid of that, and now you have a colorized image. It's kind of a hobo way of doing it, but it works just the same. And then after that, you can lower that down. Oh, okay. I was accidentally moving the layer down. Make sure that you have your frame 1 selected. And okay, there it goes. And then you can lower your opacity down and work that way. That way it's a little bit easier to see. And then once you're done, you can just get rid of your multiply layer and move your opacity back up. And then you'll be done. So that's all the stuff I'm going to be doing in the future. I'll pause if I think of anything else that I did not cover. But that's pretty much everything that you guys are going to have to worry about in regards to how to set up these little animations like this. Again, what I'm drawing here is very much so more complicated than what you guys have to worry about. If you guys are just starting out, honestly, the easiest thing to do would just be a single, just make 5 layers and then just draw something on each one of those 5 layers. Blah, blah, blah. I'm a little stick man. And then once you're done with 5 separate drawings, which are all just one layer, just bring it into Photoshop. And I'll have to reopen this damn thing. Just bring it into... Oh, for God's sakes, don't start now. My external hard drive likes to pause. But you see that we have our timeline here on the bottom. That timeline exists for a reason. It would be much easier to show if my external hard drive would... There we go. Kieran. There we go. Actually, I should show this with one that already has it. And I've already showed this once before. Let's go to August. That's when I did these. Like you see, like this is the final GIF of Emoya here. Our timeline down here, we haven't gotten to this stage yet. But once you have your 5 frames of animation, then you would make 8 different layers. Well, yeah, you can do it. You don't necessarily have to make 8 layers. You can like just have your... Actually, Emoya's complicating this because she has that tail swishing thing. It'd be easier to just show you. Right, here we go. Because again, frame 6 is actually just frame 4 again. Like, see, there's this, and then you turn on frame 4. Nothing changes because it's the exact same picture. You don't have to worry about it. And I accidentally fucked up frame. This is one of the really annoying things about animating in Photoshop. Photoshop is super finicky about changing anything on the timeline. But anyways, in Photoshop, the way that the timeline works, and this is going to get super complicated, unfortunately, because Photoshop barely knows what it's doing. But you have your timeline. Let's just get rid of our timeline right off the bat. Get rid of that real fast. And this is, frame 1. Okay. It'll show up with your one... If you have an image there, then it'll show up with one frame. 1 frame so far. Because, you have a still image. What you'll want to do is, just, if you're working with 5 frames, you want like 8 frames or something. Again, it depends on how many frames you have, how many frames it'll take to complete it, and then loop back to frame 1. So you would have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Because number 1 is frame 1. Then you go over to frame 2, click on frame 2. Disable frame 1 on your kind of layer sheet over here. Enable frame 2. And you'll notice it changes now. And then if you go to frame 3, you notice that frame 3 still has layer 1 selected. And this is a Photoshopism. You will, anytime that you edit a frame that's right before any of the other frames, like if I go back to frame 1 here and enable layer 8 for some reason, then you notice on all the frames afterwards, layer 8 and layer 1 are now enabled. Because Photoshop is fucking stupid. It's trying to be helpful, and really all it's doing is just overcomplicating things. And you notice that whenever I disabled it, then it disabled everything afterwards. So, this is one of those things you just have to discipline Photoshop because it doesn't know what it's doing. If you ever realize, like when you're working, you're like on frame 6 or something, and you're turning on your little frame 6 thing, you realize, oh, goodness, I saw something on, one of these frames that I completely forgot about. And then you go back to frame 1 and fix it, then it'll screw up everything afterwards, and you'll have to start all over again. So if you're making a very long timeline, that is a nightmare. Because you will notice something, and it'll screw everything up. But anyways, the only other thing I will mention about that is that, say, if you... Let's take frame 1, for example. Let's just draw a random line. Let's enable, like on frame 8 or something. No, frame 6. Frame 6. Let's just draw a random line. Whoop. Yeah, that'll be fine. That's fine. It's just very thin, so I mistook it. And you go back to frame 1. Still there. And it seems like if you draw on frame 1... No, it's not doing it this time. But ever so often, and this is one of the confusing things about Photoshop, is ever so often it will only edit. Like if you're on in the timeline, if you're on frame 1 and you're editing like one of the pictures, like layer 7 or something, then it won't count for the other ones. They'll retain different versions of it, which is another confusing thing that even I obviously still don't really understand. It's really bad. Another reason why you should really avoid using Photoshop for animation unless you absolutely have to. Which, it's fine for doing it. Sai can't animate things, and you can take them in the different programs and doing it, but it's going to amount to the same thing every way. Because there's two different components to animating. Damn it. It's layer 3. And that is, you have to have all your drawings here, and then you have to get them all in order. That is 1, 2, 3, then we'll go to 4, 5, turn on layer 5, turn off layer 1, 6. And at this point, we would not have these, so we'll just go ahead and get rid of these. We would not actually have these. Like, you would not have drawn layer 6 if you're only working with 5 frames, obviously. But you get to 5, and you realize, well, it needs to loop back down. You might say, well, I'll just loop the whole GIF. But if you do that, then it'll just go right back to frame 1. And, it's not a smooth animation all the way back down. It just immediately reverts. So you don't want that. You want it to do the same thing it's doing normally. So you would actually have to go from frame 5 back down to frame 4. And it showed up as having 8 frames, by the way, because this is already a completed GIF that I've already exported. And as far as Photoshop is concerned, it made 8 frames, so it just copies one of them. But it's only 5 frames of animation. Don't let it complicate what you're thinking about too much. So 5, then it goes back down to 4, then it goes back down to 3, then 2, which I already have enabled, thankfully, for some reason. And then you don't have to make a frame 9 because it's going to loop. And you want it to loop. If you actually did make a frame 9 and then had it 1, then whenever it loops, you would actually see 2 frames of frame 1, which is the reason why you don't add it at the very end. So you end up getting this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And the other component, I said there were 2. You have all your drawings, you set them up in your timeline. You have to be able to set how fast it moves. Photoshop has all these presets, no delay, 0.1, 0.2. Usually I keep it at 0.15 seconds for these animations. It looks a little bit stiff, but you're not working with that many frames of animation in the first place. So if you change it to let's use our defaults, 0.2 for example. And then you animate it. Looks a little slow. If you change it to 0.1 seconds, it blends together faster, but she's a little bit too fast for my liking. That's the reason why I set it at 0.15. And the amount of speed that you can use is going to change how fast it looks. Like the lower the interval seconds, then the faster it's going to appear because you're using limited amounts of frames. If you use even more, if you had 1,000,000 frames to work with, then it would look nice and smooth. But since we're only using 5, then by the time it actually gets to frame 2, then it's not even an animation, it's just a slideshow, right? So that's why you don't do that. There's something to consider.
and this is something I really should have mentioned earlier on, but it probably would not have made any sense to you guys whatsoever. But don't do something, like, don't animate them doing something that the frames can't support, and the speed can't support. Like the tail swishing thing that I was talking about with Amoya. God's sakes. Like the tail swishing thing. Like I said before, instead of doing 5 frames for a tail, I actually had to make 8 total frames for a tail. So in this case, like, you think that layer 2 and layer 7 would be the same one, but actually, they're slightly different. And that's because the swaying of her tail is very complicated. It's more complicated than you would think, because whereas, like her chest or her eyes or whatever, they're kind of just, repeating that same small little loop of moving up, down. Her tail has to swish back and forth. And you'll notice that it doesn't look quite as smooth as it could, and that's because we're only working with 8 frames total. And so I just barely got this to work using 8 frames. Really, it should have way more than this. Like, bare minimum, I would say would be like 12 or something. So that was kind of a bad idea on my part, but I wanted to learn how to do it, and it was a learning experience. So don't try to avoid doing any. That's the reason why they're so, they're kind of just standing here doing almost nothing. That's for the sake of ensuring that it's not overly complicated. Because if you're doing something like they're snapping their fingers back and forth, or they're waving their head around and swishing their hair back and forth or something, that's going to get very, 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 very complicated. And it's going to require a lot of frames. Like, imagine someone just looking side to side. Like, they look left, they look forward, and they look right. If you only had like 2 frames of animation, then it's just going to be bip, 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 bip. If you had 3, then you at least get that one in the center, right? You need at least those 3 for it to really make any sense as to what's going on, although it would look terrible. And just the same way, if you're doing something that's really complicated, as like a tail swishing or hair swishing around, or, someone slinging their arm a certain way, and then over back around, or like a running animation is a good example of this, because you're not actually just going, a running animation, you're not, you have a lot of frames of animation. Like, you're not just having the leg go up and then back down. Like, it doesn't, like, or their leg wouldn't just go up into a bend and then come back down to the ground. A running animation is very complicated. One of the most complicated things you can do. And so it would require a lot of frames of animation. So once you have your final result and you start compiling it together, and if you chose to do something that's pretty complicated and you didn't realize it, then often whenever you get to this animation stage, you'll start animating and realize, oh, I misunderstood how that moves in real life, or I misunderstood how many frames of animation this would actually take. And at that point, you kind of just screwed up, and there's no way to fix it. You just have to start almost completely over, depending on what exactly it is that you've done. This is part of the problem-solving nature of it, and that's one of the problems with animating. One of the reasons why you need to have experience with it. So, starting out with something that's just very simplistic, just someone just standing there, is a very good way to get yourself associated with how you need to learn to animate. Anyways, I'm going to stop because I feel very bad right now, because I felt very bad last night. I'm going to add a little bit of highlights and stuff to each of these individual areas, and then I'm going to do exactly what I said that I was going to do, and go into Photoshop, copy that final result, and then start working on frame 5. Then after that, I'll start working on frame 3, and then like either 2 or 4, it doesn't matter. And then after that, we'll take it into Photoshop, and I'll probably go into LiveCom then and show off all the ways that I fucked up, which I'm sure that I'm going to fuck up in some way. Because
Another thing to worry about, one last thing, I guess, is that all these things are not going to be completely even. Like her fist clenching, what I'm probably going to have to end up doing is she won't just come up evenly. Like frame 2 won't be this, frame 3 won't be this, 4, and then 5, you know. It'll actually probably be more like, since if you do it yourself, like if you take your hand and kind of make it go up into a fist, you notice that, it goes up kind of pretty quickly. Like it goes up pretty quickly, and then kind of snaps to a fist, and then kind of just shakes there for like a split second. So actually her balling up into a fist might actually happen on frame 3. And then, frame 4 might be it, moving just a little bit to signify that kind of shaking part of it. And then frame 5 would be being completely still. And this is where the complicated part of it comes in, because once it starts going down, then you wouldn't have it shake again as it goes down. So you would actually reuse. I might have to make a completely new layer for this. But anyway, you get the idea. There's a lot of problem solving in basic motion like this. It's not always going to be completely even. Especially with like hair waving in the wind. Like it's not going to be frame 2, frame 3, frame 4, frame 5. What it will actually be is more like frame 2 will be way out here because it happens very suddenly. And then the wind kind of dies down, right? So you would kind of have it taper off a little bit. Frame 3, frame 4, and then frame 5 would be almost no distinction at all between frame 4 and 5. Like it would barely move. And then it would drift back down this way. So this would be, line 5, 4, 3, 2, and then it would return back to 1. Although, honestly, with 1, the hair should shake a little bit to the side. But we're working with limited frames, so that's one of the things that probably won't happen. But again, you can see how complicated this animation thing can be, because even though really it's as simple as just working in between frames, the actual how things actually move and the weight that things have and how slow they accelerate and how fast they slow down and things is another completely totally different element to getting animations looking exactly the way that they need them to look. That's the reason why I recommend just starting with little guys. Like if you're working with little Mega Man sprites or something, that's way easier than what I'm doing. Like this is not even what I'm doing is not even upper level or anything. Like I'm a fucking amateur. Again, those nice Korean gentlemen, they're real animators, not me. So we're gonna jump ahead. This is gonna be a long ass thing that we're actually doing here, but I think it'll be worth it. I want to make sure you guys saw how everything works. I'm gonna stop. I'm gonna start working on that. I'm probably not gonna stream in the meantime though, because streaming, even though like having to stop and change Winamp songs for everyone and interacting with everyone and having to answer questions and stuff, it can be very tiring on its own, which I learned yesterday again. So no chat up on the side for a little bit of this duration. I'll do it again later. But we're going to jump ahead, time-lapse, and then we will come back whenever I have something else that I need to add. So I'll see you guys in a second. By the way, I'm not really commenting on any of the stuff that you're seeing in playback, mainly because I found out that Power Director really, really hates playing back FLVs that have been sped up without them having been rendered out. So if you're watching them only through preview, it tends to fail 100% of the time. And it'll only play back about 5 seconds before it just gives up and it's like, oh, that never happened, forget it, whatever. And it just goes back to what it's doing, which is absolutely nothing. So anyways, last we left off, as far as the explanation of all the Sonder and everything, I explained how A-Thing works, how Ability works, the general way that weather fucks all of them in the ass all the time. I guess I'll just give you a rough idea of how the story actually gets started.
because I don't want to, of course, give away the whole plot or anything like that. And a lot of it is also going to be sort of freeform in the sense of, since it's going to be sort of like Huge Quest in the sense that you guys will be giving me ideas, then it'll kind of veer a little bit from side to side. I still have a general structure that I want to follow, but a lot of the minutia of what's going to be happening as far as characters interacting and stuff like that, that's going to be left a lot up to you guys. A lot of people have that problem in like quest format, sort of webcomics or any sort of quest that's online. Prequel is a good example. The Homestuck thing. Anytime that you have like a set story, but you also let readers comment on it and say, I want this to happen. This should happen. Now, a lot of people always complain, oh, you're railroading it. Or, there's also sometimes the inverse problem where, which was my problem, actually, Huge Quest, is you give the reader so much power to do whatever they want that the story just goes completely off the rails in every direction. Like, it devolved quickly into cannibalism and some weird form of incest and also violent space battles, it went all over the place. There's varying extremes. But as far as setting up stories like this goes, really how it should go is there should be... It should be like climbing a tree. It should be like climbing the tree in the sense that there's a top of the tree. There's an end game. You have to start at the base, but there is a top. And if you're climbing to the top, then you can climb up almost any branch that you want to, and you can keep following that branch for a set amount of time before you sort of reach either the end, or you get to a point where you have so much weight on the branch that you really need to just keep going up. And that's kind of how I'm going to be approaching this, is that I have a bunch of branches that you guys can go down. I don't know what's on those branches, but I'm not going to let you go down those branches forever. And if you want to complain about that being railroading, then, go ahead, I guess. I don't care. Because I have a tip top of the tree that I want to get to. And I have main branches that I want to get to. And it's going to, it's going to follow a set story structure. But like I said, a lot of the in-between stuff, the branches that you guys can go down, is going to be up to you guys. But as far as that is concerned, goodness gracious, the general structure is this. There's Aphang. Aphang is really, really big. There's Ison. Ison is about the size of Earth. And if you're on Ison and you're looking at Aphang, then you don't see, you don't see it for what it is. To them, it just appears to be a gas giant. It's like if you were orbiting Jupiter or something. Like if Earth was orbiting Jupiter. It would just, just look like Jupiter. They don't know that all this stuff is down there in the first place. If you were to, look peer through a telescope, then you wouldn't really see anything except for, just, there's a gas giant, there it is. So landing on it is actually incredibly surprising to the main character whenever this actually happens. But the general premise is that after the war with the giants, like the Sonder are sort of, they don't really have a leader exactly, but they have a very, very prominent figure in their culture called Intasine. And she's very big, she's very strong, she's very, very old. She's like thousands of years old. She's been around for a very long time. A few other people have actually been around just as long, but they're not as prominent because she did things in the past that I won't go into that led to her gaining power in the first place. And she was very clever about it. So now she, for her own reasons, this is part of the plot too, so I won't go into it, orchestrated this war with the giants. This attempt to leave the Sonder lands by invading the south, where all the giants live. Where all the giant-ass humans are that have like big-ass swords that are the size of a skyscraper, that can kill even the Sonder in huge swaths. Like, I might mention this in the story if I can remember, but is the only one of the Sonder to actually beat one of these giants in single combat was Aeson, who, if you've ever seen art of him, is a kind of snaky-looking guy. He's very tall, wears a kind of raggedy, big, wide-brimmed hat. Very creepy-looking, has a big, long coat. Very pale, grayish skin. He's very, very fucking strong, though. And only one of them actually managed to beat one of them in just single one-on-one combat. They managed to kill some other giants, but most of that was done through ganging up on them and so forth. Very, very problematic trying to invade their lands. So in the course of all this, since most of their military that they sent in was composed mainly of men, since they were kind of considered to be disposable. Like, men are kind of considered in their culture to be sort of disposable, in the sense that since their population is already very low, then the women are kind of considered to be more valuable, whereas the men need to prove themselves in the first place, survival of the fittest once again. They have to prove themselves for the right to pass on their genes to the next generation anyways. So they're kind of considered to be cannon fodder in some ways, and the ones that actually manage to survive these great wars, or the great conflicts with one another, end up being the most prized out of all those men, and those are the ones that actually get to survive and pass on their genes and so forth. It's very healthy in the context of this is what helps their culture and their people survive. If they didn't act that way, then and they just let whoever just willy-nilly reproduce, then, you know, they would probably have died off long ago. But this war happened between them and the giants. A lot of the men were completely wiped out. A lot of the women, too, that were also part of those forces, but not quite as many. So now their population is very, very low. So as a result of their population being very low, while they don't have as much of a strain on resources anymore, like food and so forth, they still are in dire straits because they just don't have the genetic diversity anymore to keep going as a species. And they don't have the number of people that they need to defend themselves against the tamed, as I call them. The tamed are another group of Sonder, sort of like the giants, except they have given in completely to the wild. In terms of the way that they're described, they have allowed themselves to become tamed by nature. And as a result, they look way more animalistic and monstrous than the Sonder even do. So they're actually pretty strong themselves. I think I've only designed one of them so far that I've actually shown off publicly, and that is Mato, who is a sort of big, almost sort of wolf / she kind of looks like an owl whenever she has her mouth closed. Absolutely layered in fur, big giant clawed hands, really bizarre looking creature. Mottled, colored pelt and so on. But if they invade, then, you know, they don't have the resources to be able to fend them back and so on. So one of the reasons why they take extreme measures to try to find new lands to inhabit is because they're trying to escape, you know, the Sonder lands, because they fear that they're going to go extinct. So to that end, they use old cache technology. Like, there's very, very few amounts of it even left, and this is basically how Intisane came to power in the first place. But they do have access to a single sort of escape pod sort of mechanism. They don't even really know where it's going to go. But they decide, we can send, you know, a few people, like 1, 2, 3 or so, to wherever this thing is supposed to go whenever you press the buttons that you need to press. And that's where the girls come in. Because whenever they press the button and they load in Shere and Amoya, and they're risking their lives, they don't know where they're going to go, they might explode for all they know, they end up winding up on Ison. And that's where they meet the main character, and that's where the shenanigans start to happen, and that's how the story starts off. They kind of live on they kind of live on Ison, this Earth-like planet, for a while, that is orbiting Afang, where they're from, and then eventually they need to go back to Afang. And that's going to be basically the gist of what direction the story's going to take. And why exactly they go back, how they go back, and who they interacting with and all that. I'll just save that because that's the actual story. But that's the basic premise. That's the premise of this whole thing that I'm going to be doing. So you've seen Amoya, you've seen Shere. Shere is the little... She's the small one that has black hair, kind of a cat-like tail, but sort of a little bear or panda ears. And Amoya is the sort of red-haired one. She's pretty muscular. She's got kind of that wolfy look to her in some ways. Sharika is the other one that you probably have already seen. The one with white hair, sort of silver hair, and she has stripes in her hair. Very, very tall. If you remember her, she was part of an art gripe a long time ago. She was the one that was actually designed by 4chan, which I have, which I fixed over time. And now she looks as she does now. She used to have black hair. Her name is like a pun that means basically watermelon ass, because 4chan was being cute, and I decided to be cute with them. But now, like, she has her own thing going on. As far as their various histories, Shere is basically an orphan from that war that I was talking about. Amoya is the daughter of someone important that I won't go into too much. Sharika is another daughter of someone very important, except her family is much smaller, and they have taken survival of the fittest to the utmost extreme, and they live up in the mountains, where it's really, really cold, and there's barely any food, because they're determined to basically fight against nature itself. So as a result, they're very naturally strong for the ones that actually manage to survive. She's still obsessed with history, like, if you remember the art gripe, I went into what her personality and everything was going to be. Still very much so obsessed with history, obsessed with learning about anything around her. Her whole family's sort of like that. But as far as Kieran goes, the character that we're designing here, Kieran, I've already gone a little bit into her past already. She's from another land. She eventually found her way into the service of Aten. Aten, again, is the guy that actually was one of the only person that was actually able to beat one of those giants in one-on-one combat. She's in service of him. She's basically his right-hand man. And their people are sort of the secretive ones. They live in caves underground. And they keep, like, there's barely an economy to speak of in Sonder, but they're the ones that basically control most of it. They finance everyone. They control a lot of... If there's any, like, technology from other lands or any secrets to be held from other lands, they're usually ones that control it. They have a lot of different sort of subspecies, I guess you call them, that look different ways. But they tend to be either pale-skinned or, you know, some of them might have, like, really big ears because they live in caves. They're sort of bat-like in some ways. There's various different kinds of them. I won't go into all of them, but they're just sort of like cave-themed. They're themed around the idea of subterfuge and being secretive and being, you know, just very sly. And they don't really usually fight outright so much as they try to manipulate you first. And if it comes down to fighting, then they definitely will. Meanwhile, I almost called her JL again. But Kieran is sort of that way, even though she showed up at a very young age. So she still has her initial personality that she developed from her formative years. But she has sort of taken on these traits as well. She's learned to be very calm. She's very focused on what she's doing. She's the bodyguard. She's the strong arm. She doesn't say much. Whenever you see her, she's usually crossing her arms, looking down at you, thinking about various ways to exploit you. Just keeping her mouth shut, making sure that nothing slips. She's being as careful as possible. Just being smart about everything that she does. And she was already sort of that way whenever she showed up, but it's definitely heightened now. So she's actually a very smart person. She's very wise, but doesn't have a sense of humor. She's not funny, doesn't make really any jokes. She's hard to approach, has trouble making friends, and is more concerned with surviving, more concerned with forming like political relationships and controlling things and so forth, like a typical member of her race. But before all that, before she was actually Sonder, and I may not even get the chance to actually go into it. Like I said, this plot, like the thing I just told you about them going back to Afang after getting to Ison and so forth, it's not really going to involve her too much. Like, she'll be there, but she won't really have many speaking roles. She won't really show up too much in the general plot. I have a sequel to this. If it keeps going, then the story right after this one would involve her a whole bunch. But I guess I'll save the barely amount of explanation I'm going to give for it for the next little part.
Alright, we have all 5 frames of animation in theory done. Which is to say, we're going to have a lot of cleanup work to do in the future. First thing that we need to do is too many. Is just get a very loose idea of what it's going to look like. So 1, 2. This is probably going to be a bit too exaggerated. Don't be disheartened if you start combining these things together and wind up with something that looks completely out of place. Because I can guarantee you the first time that you actually piece this together into something coherent, it's going to look terrible. That's just the nature of things. Okay. 8 frames total. 0.15 like we were talking about earlier. And play and see what we get. It's actually not too horrific. Although I think we could stand with this one being delayed by about a second. Though it kind of sits for a moment. Although you can see it looks a bit unnatural as a result. Because there's no final frame at the very end where it kind of bobs backwards. So let's undo that for a second. Other than that, it doesn't actually look too bad, I guess. I think that first frame, you kind of had to just look over it and see what exactly is going on. And with this one, I think that the first frame could stand to have more... Like, the first frame could stand to have some of that bleeding out from it. And really, honestly, for what's happening, I really do need like 1 or 2 additional frames of animation for in between 1 and 2, so that whenever it comes back around, and really only for whenever it comes back around, whenever it first starts off, there's really no point in it. Or actually, what I could do is just copy frame 1 entirely, and just have like 1 additional frame of it kind of falling back into place. So I go 1, 2... And 1 to 5 does not look bad at all. Like that. That doesn't look bad. And actually what you could do, what I could do anyways, and this is thinking out loud stage, I could have her expression hang here, like her fist and her expression kind of freeze, and then everything else fall back into place, back down to 1, and then it swings up this way and comes back, and there'll be like an additional 2 frames of animation. And then her expression reverts or something, but then that would be, how many frames? 1, 2, 3, 4, guess. Yeah, I'd probably have to do a full return on that case. It would be an additional, like, 3 or 4 frames of animation. But anyways, you get the idea. There's a lot to think about whenever you finally finish off one of these things. And the funny thing is, we're not even started because we haven't done anything like trying to make her breathe or anything like that. This is gonna be a while. Like, there's still a long road ahead of us. But say on... And again, we really need to be doing it the same way that we did before.
like in the case of this, we need to go again do our keyframes. Frame 1 is fine. Don't bother frame 1 at all. So after we've done that, kind of start with, since she's kind of breathing, we'll start with the head. Let's move that up 1, 2, 3, and then follow that up with torso. The torso, the upper torso. 1, 2, 3, same thing. And there's going to be a lot of cleanup. Don't worry about that too much. And just remember that 3 count, or whatever it is that you've put in. It could be, 5 or whatever. 1, 2. And this one could be a 2. Yeah, let's keep that at 2. And the lower will be 1 up. And no, actually, let's go the full 3, I guess. 3 on that, 2 on this. And then the hand, wherever the hand can be 1 up. And that'll be our 5. And this will be 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. And the hand, I guess, can stay where it is. And bottom torso, 1, 2. Waist can go up 1. Actually, just pull that up 2. I guess the torso down will be fine where it is. And I won't be keeping these changes. This is mainly just to demonstrate what I'll be doing later. Hair, the background hair maybe needs to go up 1. And the cape background 2. And you'll kind of go backwards from that. Once you have your keyframe. See the difference between the two of them? That'll kind of make it seem like she's kind of breathing some. And actually, honestly, the head probably should have been pulled down, to be honest. So that it kind of looks like the chest is moving up, but her head is either staying in the same place or moving down to give the illusion of breathing. So, actually, 1, 2, 3. What else did we move? Head, hair back. This can move down 1 again. It's not a big deal. So it would be more like that. And actually her head can move down 1. Okay, so it's more like that. Okay. And so you go to 3, which is going to be your next little keyframe. And you'll just remember that. Depends on how exaggerated you want it to be. Let's move this down 1 again. Head down 1. Oh, yeah, sorry. Because of the way that Photoshop works. Oh, God. I need to be adjusting frame 3. I'm still on frame. Okay, there we go. And the upper one, you don't just do it the same amount all the way through, obviously. Like in this case, since we moved it up 3 pixels on frame 5, this time it'll be like 3. Or maybe even 2. Wait, what did I say? 5 on frame 5? I don't think I did. But let's just move it up 2 on this one. And this will move up 1. Remember last time we moved it up 2. Now it's just 1. And you kind of just keep doing that. And I'm going to go through and do the whole thing, but you get a very rough idea how it works. And now, because I didn't move the other ones, it kind of looks like she's chuckling, I guess. But I would actually recommend doing that on the layers themselves, not using the animation thing. Because you'll notice, like, even though 3, I set it to 3, which would be number 7, it doesn't retain it. Because remember, 3 and 7 are actually the same exact frame. But since I didn't adjust 7, as far as the timeline is concerned, they're 2 different things. That's what I was talking about earlier whenever I said that Photoshop likes fucking with things on the timeline. That's what I'm talking about. So the easiest way of dealing with that is to just forget the timeline before you start doing that and just adjust them manually within the layers themselves. That way it'll animate smoothly without you having to worry about adjusting it for 3 and 7 or 2 and 8. Alright, but that's what I'm going to be doing in the future. Let's reset that just to be safe. go back to, what the hell? Frame 1 deleted. And at this point, I'm going to be doing an adjustment period where I try to look at the animation for probably like the next 15 minutes. And to spot little incongruencies, try to adjust it where I possibly can. And again, try to make sure that everything is smoothed out as much as it possibly can be. Trying to actually get these things to look natural and smooth at the same time is very difficult. Make no bones about it. But you will eventually be able to settle on something that looks fine. Although it will take quite a long time, especially when you're working in Photoshop, and Photoshop likes to fuck around. It doesn't like to cooperate. And remember, you end on 8, which is number 2, because it loops back around the number 1 if you're doing it this way. Yeah, definitely need a return layer, where it kind of bobs to the opposite side, because that's how wind works. Or how physics works, anyways. And I do need to add a little bit of side cape right there, because that's too much. I'm not getting enough right there. So I'm going to adjust that, and I might add an extra layer that's just kind of this, except it bobs to one side, and that'll be actually a number 9. So I'll cheat that way. Alright, but you guys get the idea. We're going to jump ahead with even more speed running. Yay! Off we go. Okay, last little bit here of live com, or actually post com, sorry. Just to add on a little bit to what this character was like before actually becoming what she is today. Used to be a very sweet girl. Probably this is stuff you guys probably won't ever even see, to be honest. Very sweet girl. Used to be a dancer. Had a pretty happy, typical family life. Did not come from a embroiled, war-torn nation or anything like that. Was not really, it didn't have the problems that the Sonderlands had. It wasn't ravaged by storms. It wasn't ravaged by conspiracies or weird Silent Hill monsters or anything like that. Very ordinary life until something happened that I won't go into, which necessitated. I've been talking so long today that I just can't. I just can't. I've been streaming for I actually have been streaming the entire day, so my voice is pretty rough right now. But she had it necessitated, there we go, her escaping her homelands, and via different methods, she eventually just so happened to wind up in the Sonderlands herself, which will happen from time to time, but it's very, very rare. Oddly enough, her master, Aten, is actually from the outside world as well. The outside Sonderlands, anyways. So that's kind of one of the reasons why they hit it off, as it were. But other than that, I'm not going to go too much into the various history and everything of her nation or anything like that. But she was just a very sweet, innocent girl. She wasn't like a trained soldier or anything like that. Just a very ordinary person. The kind of person that might be watching this very video. And, whenever she had to basically fight tooth and nail to survive, after, her teen years, and, that kind of turned her into the person that she is now. Although once she came across Satan, she was in danger of kind of just becoming feral. Just kind of turning into a wild animal, as it were. And just, being as monstrous as some of the other people around her. But the fact that she actually washed up on Sonder actually ended up being beneficial in some ways to her, because she managed to find Aten, and he knew kind of exactly what she was going through. And if you'll look at Aten's design, you'll see that he also, he doesn't have a tail, he doesn't really have the big ears or anything like that that is kind of typical of the Sonder. So through him, she was able to find a little bit of peace and serenity, even in the environment that she was in. And as a result, she was able to focus all of these new things that she had to go through into something that's more beneficial. And as a result, that's why she is what she is today. Like, you know, she's kind of my big boss in a way, as I was making the joke earlier. You know, focused, has, you know, she's a soldier first and foremost, but in her heart of hearts, she's still that little girl that she used to be. And that kind of what ends up, that's what drives her. She doesn't really have many interests left from those days. She still loves music. She still loves dancing and things like that. But those are things that she has left far behind her, and she doesn't know if she'll ever be able to reclaim any of it. But that's her personality. I hope you guys enjoyed this little live com bit. Here's the ending. So long. Bye. Alright. We're done. We are finally done. I decided to take it up to 12 different frames. And I took it up to 12 because I decided that I wanted to include one, like right here. It's just complicated nonsense. You don't have to worry too much about it. Frame 1, frame 2, frame 3, frame 4, frame 5, then back to frame 4, back to frame 3, 2, 1, and then remember what I was talking about, how it doesn't kind of bob to one side, it kind of locks into position so it looks very unnatural. I added 2 more frames of animation, which are number 9 and number 10. The numbering of them is kind of fucked up, but don't worry about it. And from that point, from number 1, we go to number 9, which is it just swaying gently to one side. And then frame 10, which is it going all the way to that side. Then back to 9, it's swinging backwards. Back to frame 1, where it resets. And sticks that way for 1 second before it plays again. Ta-da! Looks pretty decent, I'd say. Just moving... Oh, I see a little pixel right there. I see you. I see you. Frame 2. See, this is what it's like. This is what it's like. Fix that real fast. But this is how it's done. It's a big old mess. Just a big old mess. But it'll be just fine. Okay. You get the idea. Moving the torso up, moving the arms up and down just a little bit really goes a long way. Like giving it a little extra bit of breathing motion, and I can spot a couple of little minor errors here and there. But they're not that big a deal. I'll fix them later on, I guess. Yeah, I need to fill that in too. If you play it long enough, you can spot little minor inconsistencies. It'll be more... all the little, like, dead pixels and things that got left behind, I'll fix later on. But I hope this has been a sufficiently long enough explanation. I'm sure I have, like, 2 hours of live comm now. But that's how it's done. We started from our little... Actually, I'll just do this in Psy so I don't ruin it. We started from our little primaries here. From our basic concept sheet, where we were just coming up with rough ideas, to our little initial pose, where we just sketched things out until we got something that gave us a rough idea of what we wanted, that looked like crap. Then we kind of just worked over that until we got something that more or less looked okay. And then we did one last little primary where we sketched out the definite framework of what we wanted. And you'll notice that even then, it didn't come out exactly the same. Like the leg is a little bit further in than it is in this image and so on. Very minor differences. You'll always get that. Don't worry too much about it. Just make sure it looks good in the final product. And for that, we started on frame 1. We drew this. I'm probably mentioned this in the sort of sped up parts of this, but I had to take the individual groups and merge them down into whole layers. Like, remember that, like, the hand one had, like, the line work, and then it had color under it, and then it had, like, shading over that, and so on and so forth. Now it's just one whole thing. And that's because Paint Tool Psi, whenever I brought it back into Paint Tool Psi, Psi apparently has a limit of 255 layers, and it did not like that I had created so many. So, to get around that, I just had to merge it all down, which I had, already, I had already pretty much been done with those layers anyway, so that wasn't that big a deal. If you come across that sort of problem ever, what you can do is, like, make another... Well, not like this. It's not very good at all. Change the canvas size real fast. This is kind of a little bitty trick that you can do. Like, if you want to preserve your layers, you don't want to merge them down, you want to save them or something, what you can do is just tell Photoshop to duplicate that group, and rather than your destination being the document, you can send it over into some other canvas that you have opened up. It can be another file, it can just be a blank canvas that you just made, like now. Then just hit OK, and that frame will show up right here. And you can kind of just store it somewhere else. Then if you're working in Psi or some other program that doesn't like having too many layers, or you just want to keep a backup, then you can, have a backup in another file. And whenever you want to port it back, just do the same exact thing. Duplicate the group, then tell it to port it over into the PSD that you've been working on. And then it'll wind back up in there, and you won't have anything to worry about. So that's that. That's how I got around that little problem. Big old mess is what that was. But I imagine that's stuff that you guys won't even really be worrying too much about. This is sort of a loose introduction of how to animate. Really, like all the problem-solving stuff that we did here, especially with these additional layers, is stuff you probably don't need to worry about too much. General premise is that you just keyframes and in-betweens. That's all you really need to worry about. Just start with the thing that's most important, like frame 1 is very important. Frame 5 in my case was very important. If you're only making like a 3-frame animation somehow, then it would be 1 and 3, obviously. And then just draw everything in between. And if something doesn't look right, just add another layer or adjust it. And just keep doing that. Like, there's no rules for this. Like, I'm explaining basic movement of everything in existence. So I can't give you a general rule of how to work with all that. But the general idea is just keep playing with it until it actually looks right. And you will not get it right the first time. It will absolutely not be right the first time. So if you start animating it, it looks terrible, which mine did, don't worry about it. It's just going to. It's a lot less forgiving whenever you actually are the keyframe, like head keyframe guy for like a major like Japanese studio or something. And that's the reason why that's a very important job and why they don't fuck around giving that to the right guy. Because as you can see, if you don't get it right the first time, then you can end up having people... Well, this is repeating animation, so it's not that big a deal. Normally it's going to be linear, so you don't have to worry about it repeating most of the time. Unless you're doing like a walk cycle where like characters are just walking across the screen and you want to repeat it over and over again. But you can easily screw up absolutely everything about the end result. So you have to be extremely careful about it. So that's why that's as important as it happens to be. Now I'm going to spend the rest of my time doing a little bit of minor cleanup, which won't be on camera. But anyways, thank you guys for watching. I hope this has been informative, as it has been incredibly long. It's going to take a long time to upload, I'm sure. Anyways, say goodbye, Kieran. You and your pretty blonde platinum hair. So long, everyone. Get to practicing. Hope you learn as much as I do in the process of tearing your own hair out, which I no longer have. Bye-bye.